Hello everyone and welcome to week 5 of the course. Today we will be discussing some tips on how one should prepare for interviews. This is pretty much the last leg of your course and I will be discussing with you what exactly interviews are, what is the importance of interviews, and how should you actually prepare for them. And I will be definitely giving you some key tips on how you should. So I'm sure a lot of you would be aware of what interviews are, whether you are a law graduate or whether you are a professional. You all would have given interviews time and again in your life. Perhaps some might have given interviews for placement, some might have given interviews for internships. So I'm sure you have a basic understanding of what interviews are. So let me just briefly point out what all we will be discussing. As I had mentioned, importance of interviews. We will be also discussing some popular questions which you should prepare for during an interview. We will be discussing some common business etiquettes, in which I will talk about email etiquettes, meeting etiquettes, and face-to-face communication and business meetings, how you should actually prepare yourself for such discussions and meetings. So now let me quickly tell you what is an interview. Now, interview is nothing. It is just a sort of formal meeting between a prospective candidate and an employer. Now, what happens in an interview? In an interview, the prospective employer will ask the potential candidate certain questions subject to the position for which he or she is being interviewed. All right. Now, consider a scenario where you apply for a job and you apply for the position of an associate in a chamber or in a law office or in a law firm, and the area of practice under which you applied is intellectual property rights. So definitely the employer will ask you questions pertaining to that particular area of practice, pertaining to the job profile, the description of job that has already been shared with you prior to your application, and of course vis-a-vis the work that you've already done, which will form a part of your resume. You may all remember that we discussed in our last conversation in the last lecture that how important it is to have a well drafted resume. So this is where it actually comes into play. Now, of course, a job interview can be a very challenging experience for a prospective candidate. Why do I call it challenging? Is because it can be something which is, pretty much nerve wracking, in the sense that you have to prepare a lot for an interview. You have to do a lot of background research about the organization, and the idea is that it, of course, this formal interaction of course plays a vital role in ensuring that an employer is able to select the right candidate for the job opportunity or for the job opening. Hence this entire process seems to be a very time consuming exercise and a very time consuming process. I mean, it's exhausting, it's mentally also draining, because a candidate has to prepare for several rounds of interviews. You have to go through several rounds. I mean, once you keep on getting selected, you have to keep on brushing up on your basics and so on and so forth. So it is definitely time consuming, as well as it is mentally exhausting. So why is an interview important? Like I just mentioned, that the role or the job of an employer is that he selects the right candidate who is the right fit for the organization. Now in doing so, he has to follow a process. Now if he has to follow a process, he has to ensure that it is in various stages, right? So of course, there are a lot of candidates who apply for literally one job opening. It becomes it is on the responsibility of the employer to ensure that he's able to filter out the best employee for his organization. So of course it provides a chance to the employer to sort of scrutinize all the prospective applicants, all the prospective candidates for that matter, and then pick the most suitable candidate for his organization. So the importance is that you have to always have the perfect candidate for your organization and for, of course, the job description. So hence, it's very important to have that formal communication between the candidate and the employer. the employer needs to understand the wavelength of the employee. He needs to understand how well is the employee equipped with understanding the nuances of law or the nuances of a particular area of practice, right? He also needs to understand whether the employee who has actually applied for the job opportunity is ready and willing to put in the sort of effort or the sort of hard work that is required to fulfill a particular opening. So therefore it becomes important for an employer to conduct these interviews in various stages or in various rounds. Of course, interviews definitely are a stepping stone to sort of check the communication skills of the prospective candidate. Now, as I explained you that communication skills are very important, and in fact, the entire module is based on communication skills. We started from what is the importance of effective communication and soft skills. So in interview, your communication skills are something which actually are tested, and they are actually judged by your prospective employer. So it's very important that these aspects are taken into account and taken into consideration by an interviewer when he is interviewing a candidate. And as I said, that all of this is basically to you know weed the unsuitable candidates and get the right candidate for the organization. Now, moving forward, it yes, interviews also are a check wherein an employer gets to check whether what you've submitted or what you've written in your resume stands correct or not. So it's basically an opportunity to verify that the information that you have actually given, or the information that has already been provided by way of your resume, is correct or not. So it's a process, or it's a form of verification as well. Yes, it does also help the prospective employer in judging a candidate vis-a-vis the his mannerism, his conduct, how he formally how he dresses up, and so on and so forth. So this is obviously, when we talk of the various forms of interview, I will discuss these aspects in a little more detail. Again, interviews are also a way in which a prospective employer can assess whether a candidate is there to stick or what his future plans are. Certain things, of course, are not really mentioned on a resume. Something like, whether a candidate wants to pursue a master's degree, or something like whether he's already in the process of finalizing some courses abroad, and this opportunity or this time he's basically just using to cover up a gap in his resume. These are certain things which are not really visible on the face of it in a resume. So a physical interaction with the prospective employee will definitely help the employer in assessing these important aspects, and these points which are very important when we select a candidate for a job opportunity. Now, moving forward, if I may just bring your attention to various types of interviews. So I'm sure a lot of you might be aware of the most common form of interview, which is the face-to-face interaction, wherein it's the most common form of job interview. In fact, you apply, then you get a call, and then you're called to the respective organization or to the respective office, and then you are interviewed. However, there are various other types of interviews also, and especially in light of the pandemic, these forms of interviews have time. I mean, they've taken as much. They are as important as physical interviews were. So something like a telephonic interview, which earlier was not as was earlier not as important as it is today. Something like an interview through a Skype, which again happens online. Something like an interview through these platforms such as Google Meet or Zoom. All these are other forms of interview. Of course, there is a panel interview, which is of course again a form of physical face-to-face interview only. So these are various forms of interviews which an organization may consider while selecting a potential candidate. Now, you may be thinking that, what can or what will be some potential questions or some common questions which can be asked to a candidate during an interview. Of course, this is something that comes at a preparatory stage. Why I say preparatory is because once you prepare, or once you are going for an interview, there are a couple of things which you need to prepare in advance, and these questions form a part of that preparatory stage. So some common questions, like tell us about yourself, or what are your goals 5 years down the line, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and why should we hire you, and what type of work do you do, what is your area of interest. These are some common questions which are usually asked in an interview. Now, this can be irrespective of the format of the interview. These questions can be asked by the potential employer. These questions are very basic in nature. These are not technical questions. So when we talk of questions, also the questions are also categorized into two categories. One is your general questions, and the second are your technical questions, right? Your general questions are something which I've already just given examples of. Those will form a part of your general questions, and these are some questions which you should prepare in advance for, because something like tell us about yourself, definitely when you go for an interview you will be asked to introduce yourself. When that happens, you should have some sort of an idea as to what you want to actually communicate to the prospective employer. So it's important that you have a basic idea of these questions and the answers that you would want to give in case you are facing such questions. Now, technical questions would be something which is related to what you mentioned on your resume. Now, suppose you have mentioned that in your internships, you had undertaken some sort of a research under Order 7, Rule 11 of the Code of Civil Procedure. So a prospective employer might want to ask you what Order 7 Rule 11 of the Code of Civil Procedure talks about, or somebody might have mentioned about some provisions in the Arbitration Act. So these are technical questions which are field related or specific to the area of law in which you have shown interest, or in which you have applied for, right? So those are technical questions which also should be prepared in advance. How you can prepare for them is, of course, you should prepare for everything that is mentioned, that has been mentioned in your resume, whether it is in internships or whether it is in any job. Anything that you have mentioned as a part of technical information should always be prepared and be handled very carefully when you are asked about it in an interview. uh, Now, how to crack an interview? Of course, there is no set straitjacket formula that I can discuss here when it comes to how to crack interviews. What I can, in fact, or definitely tell you is the tips that you can keep in mind while preparing for interview. And one of the tips, as I was just talking about, is the preparatory step that you should take and the preparation that you should do. Now, you have to be, thoroughly aware and sure of the fact that why do you really want to get this particular job. So those are certain things which you should keep in mind when you are going for a job interview. You have to stand out from the pool of candidates who applied for this interview. Now, the important part here is how would you stand out? Of course, you can stand out basis the credentials that you have on your resume. You can also stand out if in case there is a group discussion. You can also stand out during the course of a group discussion that is happening, or during the course of the interaction that you have with the prospective employer. Apart from that, the background research that you should do to sort of impress your prospective employer should be about the organization, how well, or how old is the organization, what are the recent deals, or what are the recent matters they have been a part of. So that is some sort of an extra knowledge that you can have, and you can definitely in a very subtle manner, uh, not show off your knowledge, but yes, of course, communicate in a very subtle way to the employer that yes, you're aware about how well the organization has been doing, what are the kind of matters it is dealing with, and what are the high stake matters that it has recently dealt with, and which have been in the news or have been reported recently. So those are some tips that you can keep in mind, so that you just get maybe some extra brownie points from the employer side. uh, some basic rules: of course, you have to be punctual, you have to be well prepared, you have to be confident and not overconfident. Definitely, you should definitely be suitably dressed in formal attire, and be honest in whatever you're answering to the interviewer. These are some very common tips, and this is nothing out of the box, because this is something that you uh, definitely will keep in mind. Like I said, knowing the organization is very important. So research about the organization, about its key people, the managing partner and the key partners, and basically just to show awareness about the organization. So that you should do. uh, Preparing responses to common interview questions, I've already dealt with previously, right? That you should have some sort of answers ready, because those responses will of course show a lot on the side of your communication skills, and also on how articulate you are while you're responding to those questions, and of course your attitude and your personality while you're answering those questions. So be positive in your approach when you're answering those questions. Formal attire, yes, I've already mentioned that point to you. Being punctual, of course, it's very important for you to understand that uh, being punctual doesn't really mean that you're just reaching maybe 2-3 minutes before your allotted time. It is a lot to do with the at least reaching there at least like 10-15 minutes before, so that you get the feel of the atmosphere and the environment you are going to step into. And you in that process, what happens is you tend to also observe the dynamics of the workplace, because you would see, you would be constantly seeing people coming in, going out, and it's depends on what time you are into you have been allotted. But usually, if suppose you have been allotted a morning slot, it's definitely some I mean, you will definitely get a feel of the organization. You'll definitely get a feel of the dynamics of the workplace, how people come in, how they dress up, the staff, and so on and so forth. The other important tip that I should give you is that when you go for an interview, definitely you have to carry 2 copies of your resume. That is a standard rule that you should keep in mind. Apart from that, you should also carry all your documents, certificates, all these important documents that you have sort of referred to in your resume. So if suppose I'm saying that was enrolled for a certificate course at Asian School of Cyber Law for cyber law. So I should have that certificate with me, because to suppose the employer wants to verify or wants to check if this information stands correct, then at least I should be in a position to to show him my certificate in case needed. So carry all your documents, your mark sheets, your curriculum certificates, extracurricular certificates, everything that you can in a proper neat folder. Don't of course use good separators, so that you don't have to at that point of time get hassled about what is there. um, Now let's discuss some common business etiquettes which are very important, and these are going to be helpful to you when you are in fact working somewhere, or when you are meeting some professionals in the field, or when you're going for some let's just say some competitions, where you're meeting some renowned lawyers or renowned judges, perhaps if you're going for a moot court competition or some debate competitions where you have these people. Now, first and foremost is that you should always be humble while you're introducing yourself. A lot of people have a habit of going overboard when they talk about themselves. The idea of introducing yourself is not to make someone feel that he's inferior and you're superior. So the idea of introducing yourself is to just give a basic introduction about who you are. If you're a law student, just a very basic introduction of which college you come from, and which semester, what are your basic likes, dislikes, or whatever. It's a very general introduction. You don't have to get very technical right now. uh, your body language plays a very important part when you are meeting somebody, whether you're meeting them for the first time or even otherwise, but your body language plays a very important part. So you have to be very sure of your body language. It shouldn't give a impression that you're overconfident about who you are as a person. And that needs to be coupled with the fact that you need to be very polite when you are meeting somebody who you don't know, or because you don't know what the other person is perceiving you to be. Perhaps a lot of people might feel that you're stubborn. I mean, the way you're talking, or maybe the way you're conducting yourself, the vibe that goes out. So you have to be very careful of those aspects. A cordial handshake. A lot of people have a very firm handshake. That is something which is completely unacceptable when it comes to general business, etiquettes. You have to maintain a very cordial handshake, and that all of this that I'm telling you is basically a part to ensure that you maintain professionalism in your approach, and you don't tend to get casual or tend to get very over comfortable with somebody. So it's important for you to keep in mind these basic business etiquettes. The other thing is that you should, as I said, be respectful towards others, in the sense, it's if you have a point to make, definitely make your point, but be humble and polite, and do not interrupt while someone else is trying to communicate a point, because that doesn't really give a very good first impression to a person who has just met you. Don't try and overhear conversations of some group of people or your bosses or your colleagues. That's again not suitable. Now, phone etiquettes are also something which is very important, because a lot of it also stems down to the tone in which you're talking, and especially when you're talking on phone. So while on one side you might be maintaining a decent volume in which you're talking, however the other person on the other side of the phone might feel that you're shouting, and you're being very loud in the way you're talking. So your tone while you're speaking to somebody, especially on a call, it matters a lot, and the manner in which you are communicating a point also matters a lot. So you have to maintain a very fine balance of tone while you are communicating a point to somebody. uh, Again, when you're in a meeting, a lot of people have a habit of keeping their phones in their hands, and they keep on constantly texting, they keep on looking down while the presentation is on, or while someone else is on the podium and giving some sort of a speech. That's a very bad habit, so that's a complete no. And especially when you're in a professional setup, always avoid doing that. Avoid placing your phone on the table, or do not keep it in your hand constantly. Keep it in your bag, let the meeting finish, and then perhaps take out your phone and check if there are any urgent calls. uh, a lot of people also have a habit of putting the phone on speaker and talking. Again, that is something that is not really advisable, especially when we talk about a professional setup. Because what happens is that when you're on speaker, or when somebody is on speaker, the other person gets an idea that someone else, there is a third person in the room who's able to overhear the conversation. So never do that. uh, of course, the most general rule, always put your phone on silent when you're in a meeting or in a conference or in a matter, in a court, any virtual hearing, wherever you are, always put your phone on silent. Now quickly I will discuss some email etiquettes with you. Now a lot of you might be aware about email writing, and how you should address emails in a professional setup. Always indicate the subject very clearly. You should be absolutely clear and crisp in your subject. Your subject line shouldn't be very long, so make sure that you're able to communicate it in a very crisp manner what the point of this email is. All right. Always start with some formal salutation, such as maybe respected sir. A lot of people might also prefer dear sir, and I've seen a lot of people write dear sir slash ma'am. Never do that, because you should ideally know who you are addressing the email to. This approach of dear sir slash ma'am is only used when you are writing an email to an email ID which says something like contact@abclawfirm.com, because in this you don't know who actually is the recipient of your email. So in this situation, you can always write it in this manner. However, when you know who the recipient is, whether it's a male or a female, always be very specific to that effect. Be very concise and to the point when you are writing the email. It's not necessary that your email has to run in paragraphs. The idea of an email is that it should just communicate the point briefly, as much as required. So do not really go into a lot of detailed, if unless it is something in which you're trying to communicate some broader point. But normally I'm just talking about basic emails which are exchanged between you know parties. uh, Make sure that your sentence structure is to the point, and avoid using long sentences, and check for your grammar and punctuation. Of course, full stops are very important. And a lot of people have this habit of reading the email but not responding. So it's very important, especially as a lawyer, it's very important to ensure that your uh, turnaround time when it comes to even acknowledging an email should be very quick. So even if you will take some time to sort of, cull out what really needs to go in a detailed reply, but the idea is that at least send a holding reply to the client or to your senior or whoever has emailed you. Send a holding reply, say that you have received this email and you're in the process of preparing a proper reply, and you will be able to send it soon, or maybe just give a timeline that you'll be able to send it by, let's just say, 10 p.m. or whatever. So the idea of a holding reply is that at least you have told your client or your seniors that you've acknowledged the email and you're in the process of formulating what a proper reply to it. So, and this is important when in communications which are of urgent nature, especially in certain matters which might be very urgent, where there is a back and forth of communication which is happening, and a lot of people are marked on that same chain of email. So this is very important for you to keep in mind at that point of time. Now, when you meet someone for the first time, and I'm talking about a face-to-face communication, it's very important for you to also remember that you do not have to be over talkative, and you have to limit your conversation to some basic points or basic topics. You don't have to give someone an impression that you're so try and be receptive, try and be a good listener, and maintain a standard level of professionalism, because you don't know how you're being judged by someone who's met you for the first time, perhaps. All right. So always address the person with his proper name once you've been introduced, of course, after that. And remember that you shouldn't really be asking for someone's name again and again. Of course, if you're new to an organization, you may have to ask, but other than that, don't really indulge in the practice of unnecessarily asking who's who. uh, Meeting etiquettes, of course, are, I mean, they're not as different as they look, because face-to-face communication is also a form of meeting only, or when you're meeting somebody. So you have to again maintain a standard level of professionalism. If there is a conflict, or if even there is a conflict, you should be aware of how to handle that conflict. You should be able to sort of provide constructive views to a discussion if required. And of course, be prepared. If you're meeting somebody, be prepared for that meeting. And if there is some sort of a potential client who's approaching you for a matter, then in that situation, do your background research about what the if you have some idea about the basic facts that he might have informed you prior to coming. Do some background research about that. Be prepared for the meeting, and be professional in your appearance, and be you know again polite to him also, because you never know, even if that matter doesn't come to you, he may refer you to somebody else. So again, your impression makes a lot of difference. So this is what I wanted to tell you about business etiquettes and professional and interviews, and some tips in this segment. And I hope you all will be able to clearly understand what the point here was. In case you have any doubts, you can always write into me, and we will hopefully have a live session soon, in which we will try and conduct some mock interviews, so that you get a little more insight into how interviews are conducted. All right, thank you so much.